There's no other question I get asked more than, Dr. Warren, when should I prune plant X? How do I go about pruning these plants? Well, in this video, I'm going to give you my professional tips and tricks on how to prune specific plants in your yard and when to prune them as well. Hi, I'm Dr. Tom Warren, and you're watching The Plant Doctor. Let's get started. Before you start pruning anything in your yard, I want you to get into the habit of cleaning your pruners before and after you use them. And what I like to use is 70% alcohol and just a paper towel. So I'm going to open up my pruners. I'm going to apply some alcohol to my paper towel, and we are going to thoroughly wipe down our pruners. The reason I'm so adamant about cleaning our pruners before and after each use is that every year there's more and more pathogens getting introduced into the landscape. For example, where I'm at in North Alabama, a decade ago, we really didn't have to worry about boxwood blight. Now we do. We really didn't have to worry about rose rosette. Now we do. So these are pathogens that have been introduced from elsewhere that are now in my area, and I don't want to take my pruners to an infected plant, prune that plant, and then take my pruners to another plant that's not infected and prune, and now all of a sudden I have infected the new plant. So when pruning deciduous shrubs and trees, there's really three things we need to look for. We need to look for dead or diseased wood. We need to look for branches that are growing in towards the middle of the canopy as opposed to growing out away from the middle of the canopy. And then we want to look for branches that are crossing and potentially rubbing on each other. We don't want those three things. And so I have an example here. Here is a piece of dead wood. And so all we want to do is take our pruners and snip that off at the base. And we're going to remove all the dead wood in the tree. So if you look right here, you can see that this branch is doing two things. It's growing in towards the middle of the tree, which we do not want. And also, it's growing in a fashion that is going to rub on this main trunk, and we don't want that as well. So there's really two things going wrong with this particular branch. Take your hand snips as close as you can get to the base of that little branch. You want to cut it off. This last tip I'm going to give you holds true more so for trees than it does for shrubs. I like to stand back from the tree and just get an overall perspective of its shape. And I see something here with this tree that I want to correct. Even though these branches down here are healthy, to me it looks a little awkward. I think that what I want to do is raise the canopy of this tree a little bit. So as this tree matures, this tree is only 3 or 4 years old. I want the canopy to start at about chest height and go out from there. So this is a Sengokaku Japanese maple, and it's going to have more of a vase shape. And as it matures, it would be very pretty if the branching started higher up and then vased out, as opposed to having a couple of random branches down here at the bottom. So what I'm going to do is come in and actually remove these lower branches. And I want to show you a close-up of how we remove these branches. I'm very particular about how I want you to do this so that we reduce the risk of getting rot and infection into the tree. This is a close-up of the cut we just made, and I want you to see how the top sticks out a little bit further than the bottom. I don't want the bottom of your cut sticking out further than the top. That's just a place for water to collect. So if you can cut it more of a 45-degree angle, so that the top sticks out further than the bottom, that's going to reduce the risk that you're going to have rot enter your tree from a bad cut. A great time to prune your butterfly bushes is right before springtime. So it's February here. And so these butterfly bushes, they'll start to green up here in another 4 to 6 weeks. But you can see here, this butterfly bush is very leggy. I've got 3 or 4 main leaders, and they kind of went everywhere. This butterfly bush has never been pruned. It was planted here this past year. We're going to prune it pretty much back to the ground. We're going to prune it back to about a 6-inch stub on all those leaders. And what's going to happen is everywhere we made a cut, there'll be 4 to 6 new branches come out, and they'll fill in and be a nice full bush for us in the summer. So all we want to do is come in and make some cuts about 6 inches off the ground. on all these larger branches. And this butterfly bush will be way happier come next spring. Late winter, early spring is an excellent time to come in to your deciduous shrubs and look for things that should not be there. And I've got great examples here in this forsythia. We would never prune forsythia this time of year. They're literally loaded with buds right now. They're going to bloom here probably within the next 10 to 14 days. So we would never prune them in late winter, but what we can do is come in here and things like water oak seedlings, and I believe I see an Elaeagnus back here as well. Smilex, which is a vine. This is just littered with some weeds. And so what we can do is come in and remove some of these weeds, where otherwise during the rest of the growing season, we wouldn't be able to see them until they're towering over the top of our shrubs. Hydrangeas that bloom on new wood, so panicle hydrangeas. This is an example of one of those. This is limelight hydrangea. His dwarf cousin, Bobo, is another example. But we can go in and prune these down to roughly about 1 foot to 6 inches off the ground. And they're going to come back bigger and fuller, and they're always going to have blooms come midsummer because they bloom on new wood. So with evergreen pyramidal hollies like these Nellie R. Stevens behind me, and there's dozens of other relatives of these pyramidal hollies, marynail, oak leaf, we're kind of in an in-between phase right now with being able to prune them. And let me explain what I'm talking about. If you look at this branch, you're going to see that the berries are on the old wood. They're on last year's wood. They're tucked down deep into the holly. And as we progress out from those berries, that's the new growth from this past year. And these little gray clusters you see running up the branch towards the terminal end, those are going to be the flowers for this coming up spring. So thankfully, with Nellie R and all of its relatives, we rarely have to do just a ton of pruning with them. And so what I would recommend you do if you need to prune them this time of year is to go in and take like half that growth off. So that way we're leaving some of those flowers on, and that is going to ensure that next winter you have some berries. So that's what I've done with these Nellies the past several years. I'll go in this time of year and just lightly cut the tops off, trim the sides up a little bit. We have great berry output. So that's one way that you can prune hollies this time of year and ensure that you're going to have berries come next winter. Winter is also a time we want to go ahead and prune our ornamental grasses. So these maiden grasses behind me, really once they're dormant, once the plumes have faded off, you see the remnants of plumes here on these. There's not a whole lot left to them. I did a video on how I prune these. I'll leave a link up here so you can watch that. But basically, I tie a rope around the base of them, and I come with gas shears and I cut them off at the bottom, and then that rope keeps them in a nice neat bundle, and I can drag them off by the road. Makes life a whole lot easier. Once we get into late winter and your camellias have finished blooming, it's an ideal time to come in and prune. With camellias, really all I'm looking for are these longer leggy limbs, and I'm just going to cut those back towards the average height of the top of the plant. What this is going to do is give the plant a more rounded look, and also it's going to make it flush out more full in the spring when that new growth comes out. Just like with any other plant, wherever we've cut, there'll be 2 or 3 new buds pop up below that, and those will spread out and make a fuller bush. And you may be thinking, well, Dr. Warren, what about plants that we don't have in the yard for flower value? We have them exclusively for evergreen value, and for those plants, for the most part, you can go ahead and give those guys a light haircut this time of year. So things like boxwoods, arborvitaes, you can go ahead and prune those. I wouldn't cut them really, really deep at this time. If you've got wild hairs here and there that need to be taken care of, most definitely go ahead and cut those. Maybe a light shaping this time of year. If you really need to shape them heavily, wait for that new growth to come out and get a good flush, and then start to work with that new growth. But for now, just lightly prune your evergreen shrubs that do not flower. There's no other plant that I see pruned incorrectly more so than what's behind me right here. When pruned correctly, you're looking at it right now. A beautiful specimen. This is crepe myrtle, and the branching habit can be incredible. Even though it's deciduous and there's not a whole lot going on with it this time of year, it has this beautiful exfoliating bark, has this beautiful branch habit. Please do not come in here with a chainsaw and just cut that off at chest level like you see so many other homeowners doing, and you get these knots all on your branches and your trunks, and it doesn't look right. What I want you to do with your crepe myrtles is remember the thumb rule. Try not to take a branch any larger than the diameter of your thumb. Here again, just like with pruning any other tree, we're looking for crossing branches, we're looking for dead, diseased branches. Of course, we're going to remove those, but for the most part, remember the thumb rule, and you can have results like this. Late winter is an excellent time to go ahead and deadhead your perennials if you haven't already. For example, these Shasta daisies, I gave them a light pruning earlier in the season, but if you want to, you can go ahead and cut these dead stalks back all the way to the ground. And if we look underneath the leaves right here, we already see next year's growth emerging for the Shasta daisy. So what I'm going to do is come in here and cut all this back to the ground. I'm going to put a layer of pine straw on top of it. That way we have that added aesthetic appeal of the pine straw, and as that new growth continues to emerge of the Shasta daisies, that greenery comes up out of the pine straw, and then we get those beautiful white flowers. So azaleas, we never want to prune in late winter. They set their flower buds the previous year. So the flower buds for these azaleas are already on this bush. So if we come in here to start to prune this spring, when we're expecting these beautiful shrubs where there's so many flowers that you can't even see the greenery, it's not going to happen. So you want to wait until after they flower and then prune your azaleas. There's one thing I want you to remember here, and that is what we call the May rule. If it flowers before May, wait until after it flowers to prune. If it flowers after May, we can go ahead and prune in the late winter or early spring. That holds true for pretty much every single plant that you're going to have in your yard. So remember the May rule on when to prune and when not to prune. So outside of azaleas, what other examples can I give you that we should not be pruning in late winter, early spring? One of them's here right behind us. So this is loropetalum. We don't want to be pruning loropetalum in early spring. Some other examples would be oak leaf hydrangeas, macrophylla hydrangeas, edgeworthia, or any rhododendron. We want to avoid pruning those in late winter, early spring. Remember our May rule. If it's blooming before May, we want to wait. If it blooms after May, we can go ahead and prune. If you need to renewal prune any plant in your yard, late winter is the time to do it. For example here, these Japanese ligustrums, they're really tall. I'm not going to renewal prune them today, but if I wanted to, I could take these all the way back to waist height. It may take a chainsaw to do it, but they're going to come back in the spring, they're going to flush out, and they're going to be just fine. When done correctly, late winter, early spring pruning can give you great benefits rolling into the growing season of spring and summer. Hope this video brought some value to your lawn and garden. And guys, as always, thank you for watching The Plant Doctor. And until next time, happy gardening.